All right, next up we have another conversation coming up. In a second, I'll be bringing out Eric Pullier and Rich Karlgaard, who will be joining us here on stage. Eric is an entrepreneur, author, and philanthropist. He's the founder of over 15 companies. And he's currently the CEO and founder of Vatom, which is the first platform that enables anyone to create their own place in the metaverse. And Rich is a columnist and former publisher at Forbes, and now is the futurist and editor-at-large there. He writes the Tech Connect column for Forbes Asia and hosts the Innovation Rules video series for Forbes.com. He's also the author of multiple best-selling books, most recently a book called Late Bloomers. We're really excited to have them here for this conversation, so please welcome Rich and Eric.
Eric, it's a thrill to have this conversation in so many ways. When I look at what your company Vatom is doing, I see the potential of what Apple did to the personal computer revolution, later the phone revolution. I look at what Adobe did to tools that made graphics work so powerful on desktop computers. I look at what Salesforce did using a cloud-based system to run sales, completely changing that. But before we talk about Vatom and before we talk about the metaverse, I just have to get you to comment on how did an English major like you, magna cum laude at Harvard, by the way, but how did an English major like you get into tech in the first place?
Well, I got into tech almost as soon as I got into English, actually. I was in probably around 4th grade when my father brought home one of the first computers small enough to fit in the home, 55, so that was quite a long time ago, 45 years ago. And right from the start, I was hacking, and I kind of remember that even in 10 years old, my teacher was concerned that my report on whales was written by the computer instead of me. Even now, I'm proud to say I can write a report on whales better than any computer, but you know, we have a ways to go. But for me, it was always about using the power of technology to tell a story and to create a human connection. And I've kind of stuck to that opportunity goal ever since.
When you study technology that affects human beings, you see these phases. The web browser really catalyzed the internet. The internet, you know, was an email between UCLA and Stanford long ago, but it was the web browser of the early to mid-90s that catalyzed it. It was the smartphone, the iPhone in 2007, that really catalyzed the next phase of e-commerce and social networks. Tell us what's catalyzing this new phase of the metaverse and why you're so excited about it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you're exactly right. These moments where you can call them a catalyst to the next phase of innovation that then just explodes as an exponential curve on top of that base. My great friend and incredible futurist, Peter Diamandis, calls these the interface moments. The moments when the complexity of these technologies that are generally in a small niche set of users suddenly become mainstream. And they become mainstream because of two factors. One, on one side, is that people can create things on this confluence of technologies to make money. They get motivated to do it. And the reason is because on the other side, there's an interface layer where people can consume it simply, easily, conveniently. And that's what the web did to the internet. That's what the iPhone, in some ways, did to mobile internet. And now we have the next great step change. And to answer your question of what makes this moment so important, from my view, I think people are focusing on the wrong things, which is because NFTs became so powerful and successful from a financial point of view in the last few years, they're focused on the get-rich-quick schemes, the gambling aspects of that, and the speculative frenzy that's underway. Or because Ready Player One came out and the metaverse seemed like really exciting, or Facebook changed their name to Meta, they're focused on how can we make Fortnite better. But that's not really what it is. This is part of a continuum where static pages went to dynamic pages on the web, and dynamic pages went to e-commerce enabled and semantic pages, et cetera. And now we got to a point where the next great step change is upon us, but not in 5 years when we can all play ping pong in the metaverse with Mark Zuckerberg, if anyone wants to, hold your breath, it's coming. But right now is the power of this opportunity. Right now, we're adding 3 things to the internet. 1, identity. Today, identity is really broken on the internet. When you go from site to site, place to place, you're not yourself. You're logging into these silos, and you don't own your data. The data is owned for exploitation, sometimes against you, but certainly not in collaboration with you. So 1 is your identity. The next is true ownership. You don't own things within these sites. You actually have a license within a silo that if the website or the game dies, your goods die. That doesn't happen when you buy a hat at Yankee Stadium. You own that hat. You take it home. If the Yankees have a bad season, you still have the hat. You can wear it to Dodger Stadium if you'd like. It's true owner, the psychology of ownership. That's the power of the NFT. And then the last piece, and perhaps the most important, is bringing the human back into the internet. The actual social layer. The way that we experience this and the way I'll remember this is not just having a great conversation with you, but it'll be where I am. The social and spatial context of this that takes a short-term memory into a long-term memory and experience. We're now adding these 3 things to the web, which is already pervasive throughout society.
One of the most important things I've heard, one of those moments where you say, if I had really paid attention to what this person was saying, and I'd bet my entire future on it, was in 2017 when Diane Greene, who was the co-founder of VMware, and at the time was the CEO of Google Cloud, one of the most impactful figures in Silicon Valley's history, but a quiet figure so she doesn't get credit. But she said the underlying rate of digital technology evolution had jumped the tracks and was moving along at a rate 2 to 3 times faster than the 50-year era where you could predict the pace of digital technology by how fast things were happening in semiconductor evolution or Moore's law. Is that what's happening now? And when you compound something that was already moving that fast on a year-to-year basis, and then 5 years and 10 years, and now you double or triple the speed, what does that say about how fast the metaverse is going to roll out?
It says, hopefully, to everyone in this audience, to recognize that this is not a phenomenon to study because it may become interesting to you in 5 years when it matures. It's a phenomenon that is upon us now and that will leave you behind if you're not on that train. And the reason is because each of these elements that you saw maturing over the last few years have matured not only significantly to be ready independently, but to converge on something simple enough to be consumed and used in education and healthcare and government and marketing and advertising and entertainment. Everywhere the web made a difference. And these things are such things as augmented reality, virtual reality, 5G networks, edge networks, the ability to actually have a blockchain that you can have an independent observer and authenticity of something. And couple all of that together with tokenization and the ability to do spatial sound and next generation human engagements within these environments, you suddenly have a moment where instead of saying, wow, this is all complex and interesting that I'll watch, somebody's just gonna hand you a virtual cup of coffee and you're gonna be like, oh, thanks, I'll take it to Starbucks. And that all converges in one place, right? An augmented reality coffee I can put on the table. It's in one place at one time. You can pick it up. It can change state. It can change by the weather or sports scores into something else, and you can now redeem it. It's gamified. It connects you to someone else. And that simple cup of coffee is gonna represent a sea change in how we see human engagement for the next generation of the web.
Well, let's go into that a little more, because I would venture to guess in this audience of really enthusiastic, educated people who've taken the trouble to come to yet another ASU+GSV Summit. So you're in the top percentiles already, but there's probably no small amount of skepticism when we hear terms like metaverse and NFTs, maybe because some of the examples that we've seen over the last 12 months mean NFTs of bananas, selling for $100,000. I mean, for all the promise, there's a lot of noise out there. There's fraud, as you've pointed out. Can you tell about the audience to say, yes, there will be goofy stuff, there will be fraudulent stuff. That's always happened when there are technological revolutions. People will use it for good, they'll use it for ill. How do you keep your eyes on the prize? Give us a definition of NFTs and that maybe particularly apply to education, and why they will be important, and they won't be the equivalent of cat videos.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to see a crash in the current model of extreme focus on speculation and gambling with NFTs. Those of you who are familiar with NFTs, you'll probably note, maybe with some level of FOMO, like, well, how did that kid just get a JPEG and make $1 million on selling it? Well, that's okay. If you look at the history of the World Wide Web, we had the same thing. People like myself were going around the world trying to evangelize to every man, woman, and child, business and government entity that they should have websites and they can leverage this technology. And we started to forecast this exponential curve of adoption. And people would say, 40 million people are never going to get on the internet. And the websites come down in, like, it takes 30 seconds to draw one. There's 2 seconds per frame per video. And this is just not viable. But if you look at the curve, instead of the moment in that curve, you recognize that this is inevitable. And when the crash occurred in, let's say, 2000, everyone said, well, pets.com didn't work. See, we told you so. Internet's not going to work. Well, what happens is that there's the inevitable, out of that rubble and out of that re-examination comes the flourishing of the promise. And here's what's happening now. Right now, the initial use case, when people discovered they can make money by buying and selling these goods, became the focus of the media, the focus of a lot of the early adopters. But what's going to happen next is the actual utility of this, which is how it applies to education. The actual utility of an NFT is, instead of what it is today, 99% speculation and 1% engagement, it's the reverse. In the coming years, and I don't mean 10 years, I mean 12 months, coming year, we're going to shift that dramatically, where most of the NFTs are going to become around engagement and utility. If I give you something on a blockchain that is psychologically truly owned by you, first thing is it doesn't feel annoying to you because you're being given something of value. That's what we call it, the internet of value. If you don't want it, you can give it to someone else. The next thing is you're now somebody in the system, so with your permission, I can now communicate directly to you. That's important. The next thing is that these objects, as units of engagement, instead of units of speculation, now start to interact with you. They can give you a quiz. They can reward you for an answer to that quiz. They can become part of a puzzle that, if you get the other pieces, turn into something else. You can be in a metaverse educational environment where you're moving from place to place, and perhaps you're teaching about gravity, and you're under a tree with an apple, and you're learning about Newton's laws, and the apple falls down, and that becomes an NFT, which you can now take out and continue your journey when you're not in that exact environment. So these objects not only become valued, but valuable to the educational process because of their interactivity and their ongoing engagement that happen where the classroom is only one part of the process. The continuous education will proceed because everyone keeps their phone with them, and the objects will be on your phone, and you'll level up with gamified mechanics and then bring them right back into the system. So how we educate and how we combine the notion of gamification and true ownership and metaverse is now at its nascent stage, but very clearly going to become a dominant force.
Well, there are some social models out there that are intriguing, and when you imply all of these super technologies coming together to create a really immersive metaverse, as you are doing, some of these early social models indicate, I think, what you were just talking about in education, or I thought I heard you were talking about, and that would be user groups. My hobby is flying airplanes, and you belong to a user group where you're like-minded people, and there soon emerge experts. And there soon emerge experts that know more about this airplane or boat or fill in the blank than does the factory that made the darn thing. That's right. And you begin to trust these people more. So in education, as people are earning NFTs, is it possible that somebody could get an education and make money while they're doing it simply because they become a go-to person?
Yeah, not only possible, but inevitable. If you look at the phenomenon happening right now in what's called Web3, generally known as the confluence of these next generation technologies, one of the most interesting things to watch is the play-to-earn phenomenon. Games like Axie Infinity, those of you who aren't familiar with that, you might look it up. Despite some security breaches recently, it's worth studying because you see that people around the world are earning their living by playing this game. And by putting certain mechanics within that, incentive models, you can almost direct what kind of problems you want solved and what kind of learning people are getting, but the incentive model is a little different. Now, if you bring that into education, where the most important aspect of, I think, what we're bringing with the metaverse is the social connection, the collaboration. where people will maybe form ad hoc groups of interest, but also even within traditional learning environments, they'll be doing collaborative tasks together and socializing and creating memories of having actually been somewhere with someone doing something that will stick in a more important environment. So when you have these kind of social connections and people learning, and everyone in this space has a wallet, you're not only going to get badges of completion, you're also going to be able to do micro tasks for money, exactly as you say. So this blending of learning, doing, getting paid will all start to become apparent in the coming year or two.
The late, great Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen defined this competitive landscape in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, and then in subsequent books, where it's really tough when you're the incumbent to adapt to some phase change in the underlying technology or the change in demographics in your core audience or whatever it is that leads to that before and after clear delineation. You know, that was the year that this industry changed. And it's not because incumbents are lazy or anything else. It's simply because their business structure, you know, disciplines them to look at sort of short-term results, quarter-to-quarter results, year-to-year results, whereas the disruptor has a free playing field. And it almost doesn't seem fair when you're the incumbent. So if you're an incumbent in education, how should you look at the potential revolutionary changes that the metaverse will bring in education, and how do you make sure that you're blending the best of both worlds, that you're not disrupted off your feet because you failed to notice it,
yeah.
or you maybe you get crazy and you overinvest into something you don't really know?
So I don't think that this is an overly complex question and what the road ahead should look like for incumbents, because we're not, if you don't buy into this future definition of metaverse being this thing that someday everyone's going to be wearing these headsets and you can enter these immersive environments, that's great. It'll come when it comes, and then we'll mold it to its efficacy at that time. But right now, we've already been accelerated by the pandemic to understand that we're not going back to the old model. People have started to adopt Zoom teams and things like that. They're seeing the flaws in that model, where you kind of create a fight or flight type biological mechanism where people are getting exhausted by standing in front of these or sitting in front of these cameras and feeling like they're trapped within an environment. It's not enhancing things as much as it could. It's actually creating the negative effect. So now all you have to think about is, like, if we're here to stay now, right? You're already incorporating some kind of distance learning into your incumbent system. How do you make that slightly better? So one is the fundamental principles are going to be incrementally, evolutionarily changed. So instead of just having a video on and off button on Zoom and a mute on and off button, you're going to have open and close your wallet. That's where your NFTs are going to be. That's where you're going to gain not only badges of merit, but objects that actually are incorporated into your system and your learning. The next piece is, instead of surfing the web, every website is going to have a come inside button. So you add your wallet, you add your come inside button, you keep your same existing system, but now people can socialize, have spontaneous interactions, and better memories of the stuff that they're already learning. This is incremental. Yes, we have an exponential curve that can be daunting to some, but there's incremental steps that can and must be done now to just improve the metrics you're already measured on.
Well, we've come, boy, you're a professional. He ended his statement right on the dot, time-wise. Let's give Eric a big hand, and go to vatom.com, VATOM.com, to see the future.
Thank you.